We welcome you to Perspectives on the Conflict in Ukraine, co-hosted by the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County and the Diversity Consciousness Committee of the Rossmoor Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County. Dorothy?
Greetings. My name is Dorothy Pritchett, Chair of the Diversity Consciousness Committee of the Rossmoor Interfaith Council. The Diversity Consciousness Committee works to increase opportunities for cross-cultural exchange, for engagements and collaboration with the various diverse groups here in Rossmoor. We celebrate diversity. And this afternoon, we're going to explore the current conflict in Ukraine from various perspectives. So welcome, and thank you for coming.
And the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County is glad to co-sponsor this conversation as well. We are 109 congregations, monasteries, and retreat centers throughout the county that does our work together, especially lifting up and protecting religious minorities and peacemaking and a lot of the other work that we do. You're welcome to check out our work at interfaithccc.org. We are pleased today that we have music such as that you just heard from the Kitka Women's Vocal Ensemble. And this is an amazing ensemble here in the East Bay, and I'm putting a little bit of their information into the chat room, including this link, because this is a group here from the East Bay that keeps the traditions and the cultural music of Eastern Europe and Eurasia alive here. And we want to listen to the Ukrainian national anthem before we get into our speakers. And so hear this song together.
Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're grateful that you're here and able. Ooh, that's a little fuzzy. Let's try and update that. There we go. We're glad that you're here joining us today for these perspectives on the conflict in Ukraine. We have a couple great speakers that are going to join us, and then we're going to share some of the interfaith resources that we've put together as an interfaith council. We're glad to have Gennady Mikityansky, who's a professional actor, professional puppeteer, playwright who lived in Ukraine for 37 years. He's going to speak about the current refugee situation as he's in contact with people in Ukraine, and is definitely wants to share about what's going on there. And then we're also going to hear from Dr. Raphael Danziger, who's a foreign policy analyst, former editor-in-chief emeritus of the newsletter Near East Report for AIPAC. Dr. Danziger holds a PhD in European and Middle Eastern history from Princeton University. He moved from Washington, D.C. suburb to the San Francisco Bay Area in 2017. And during the 80s, he was a foreign policy analyst for the American Jewish Congress. He previously taught modern Middle Eastern history at the University of Haifa in Israel and the University of Washington in Seattle. He's also a visiting fellow at Princeton University and a consultant on Middle Eastern affairs at the Hudson Institute. And there, we will have a time, we'll have a brief, we'll have the two presentations from our speakers. We're going to then have a piece of music, and then we're going to have a short panel conversation that I'll moderate with our two speakers, and then we're going to open it up for others. And so if you can, please keep yourself muted, as we are recording this for being able to share with those that weren't able to be with us here today. Thanks again for being here. And Gennady, please unmute yourself and please share. Gennady.
Доброго дня, шановне товариство. Я вельми вдячний, що ви сьогодні запросили мене до вас. I will translate. I started with Ukraine, which means what I said. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation. I'll be so happy to talk in front of you today. My name is Gennady Mikityansky. I was born in Ukraine. My native city is Kharkiv. And you know what is happening right now, not only in my native city. Maybe Kharkiv right now is a big city. It's more than 1.5 million people. And Kharkiv with suburbans, it was during Soviet time, it was more than 3 million people live there. So as of today, my native city practically in rubbles. So Russian army, this is not army, this fascist army trying to destroy completely buildings, infrastructure, not military infrastructure, civilian, and they kill a lot of civilians. I'm so sorry, but I have to tell you, you know, when you see picture on CNN or on the Fox News or somewhere in internet, yeah, you'll see a lot of absolutely tragic pictures. But personal story, in my humble opinion, it's more than like just picture. I have in Kharkiv a couple of relatives. They are not my relatives. This is my wife's relatives. But anyway, it's my relatives as well. And 3 days ago, my wife had in Kharkiv, she has her aunt. She's 81 years old. Her cousin, she's 50 years old. And 25 years old, her nephew, he's in army right now. And my wife's cousin, she's still working in Kharkiv, but her aunt, the unbelievable irony of the situation, she was born in 1941 during evacuation from Kharkov. When Nazis tried invade Kharkov, so last train from Kharkov, her aunt was on this train, and she was born in train during evacuation from Nazi Germany. 3 days ago, she was in hospital in Kharkov, hospital number 25. And during bombarding of this hospital, she died. And the irony of the situation, she was born when Nazis invaded Kharkov, and she died in 80 years when Russian fascists tried to invade Kharkov. I'm so sorry for that very sad story, but you have to understand what is happening there, even on a personal level. According to statistics as of today, it's more than 3 million people fled Ukraine. Poland, Hungary, Moldova, some of them Slovenia, and you know, it's like this famous phrase when if one person passed away, it's a tragedy. If more than 1 million people passed away or murdered, it's a statistics. But all these 3.1 million people who fled their houses, who fled their motherland, who left their husbands, sons in Ukraine, it's 3.1 million tragedies. On top of that, it's thousands of people who already died, who's wounded. And again, it's biggest tragedy when by the end of yesterday, it was 20th day of war, 97 kids died and more than 200 kids were wounded. So this is the situation in my native, not just my native city, in my native country. I immigrated to the United States in 1995. I love this country. She gave me and my family a lot. Liberty, freedom, freedom to express my religion beliefs, freedom of everything. But you have to understand, when I became a United States citizen, I took oath. And if, God forbid, I have to defend my country, United States of America, today, I will do it with any type of weapon. I'll be able to do so, to defend my country, United States. But you have to understand, I was born 60-something years before in Ukraine, in Kharkiv, and this is Kharkiv in Ukraine in my heart, in my soul. This is my motherland. And you cannot forget your motherland, your native city or your native village, it doesn't matter. And situation is a lot of my friends still in Ukraine, I worked in theater, I work in different theaters, puppet theaters, I'm a puppeteer. And I work in Ukraine, I work in Russia. Every day when I work in Russia, in Belgorod, you heard the name of this city, it's 62 kilometers, it's like 40-something miles from Kharkiv. Every day, I took a bus and went from Kharkiv to Belgorod. It was Soviet Union during that time. And nobody thought about one day Russia will invade my native Ukraine. And when I work at Belgorod Puppet Theater, I had an artist who worked with me, and his family live in Lebedin. It's a small city, small town in the Sumskoye region, Sumy region, and you don't know this small city, Lebedin, but you know for sure Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake. Swan in Ukrainian, Lebedь. So Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky many years ago went to Lebedin, and when he saw this Swan Lake and swans on the lake, wrote this unbelievable, fantastic music. So family of my friends left Lebedin 4 days ago. Right now they're in Netherlands. They left their house. Most likely it's destroyed right now because 3 days ago, Russian military, Russian fascists started to bombard and shell Lebedin. They came to Lebedin. They started to rob and destroy houses. They started to rape women. So they're worse than fascists. You know, like a couple of days ago, I saw a lot of photographs, pictures during Nazis' invasion in my native city in Kharkov. And I compare that pictures with pictures what happened with my native city right now, with invasion of Russian fascists. In 1943, my cities look much better than today. Much better than today. Believe me, I'm not kidding you. It's true. It's true, and every story of 3.1 million people who left Ukraine, who fled their own country, it's 3.1 million personal tragedies. So I don't know what to tell you more, but I want to tell you one thing. I'm a Ukrainian Jew. I lived 37 years in Ukraine. In my class, it was 36 people. Half of them Ukrainians, half of them Russians, and only 4 Jews. And nobody knows who's Russian, who's Ukrainian. Everybody knows who's Jew, but nobody knows what the difference between Ukrainian people and Russian people. I know what difference between Ukrainians and Russians. Ukrainians will fight till end for their freedom. In Ukrainian anthem, you heard and you read that each and every Ukrainian will give up their life, their soul, to live in a free country. This is true about Ukrainians. And even though Russian army is much bigger, it's not like second army in the whole world, because smaller army with great people defending their country every day and destroying Russian tanks, Russian jet flights, Russian helicopters, Russian tanks, Russian automobiles. And as of today, according to Ukrainian army, it's more than 13,500 Russian soldiers died during this war, and more than 13.5 thousand Russian soldiers, and more than 25,000 Russian soldiers wounded, and more than 700 Russian soldiers kept by Ukrainian army. So, but what I want to tell you, any kind of help Ukrainian will appreciate. Ukraine need weapon, any kind of weapon. They need, you'll be on Ukrainian side. What our country, United States, is doing right now. Today, President Zelensky had a speech in front of Congress of the United States. And immediately, President of the United States, Joe Biden, signed a paper. And today, a lot of weapons will be sent to Ukraine to help Ukrainians to fight for their freedom. And you know what? It's interesting thing. It was like, do I have time or not? Couple minutes. Yes or no?
6 minutes.
Oh, even 6 minutes is better. I know President Zelensky from 1992. He was not a president, of course. He's a young guy, and it's a very popular game in Ukraine. We call it, it's no like same game of the United States. It's a very popular game. It was born in former Soviet Union in 1962. This game called, in English, I will call it Funny Club. In Russian, KVN. It's a funny club. And this game, so popular in former Soviet Union, not just in former Soviet Union, it was American League here in the United States. We played this funny club. It's in Netherlands, in Germany, in Israel, everywhere. When you'll find Russian-speaking person, so you'll find such a club. And in 1992, I was like something like coach for this funny club in my native city, not just like native city. It was Avionics University, Kharkiv Avionics University. I coached their team, and we played game. And first time I saw Zelensky, he was a young guy. Nobody knows when in like 30 years after that, he'll become not just the president of the Ukraine, he'll become a real flag, an icon, not just for Ukrainian people, for people everywhere. He's a rock. And he was just a young guy, and nobody knew that he'll be a president, great president of the great country. So this is the story I wanted to tell you. It's on a personal level. It's not because like you'll hear all statistics and all analysis later, but I'm so happy you invited me today and I was able to talk in front of you. Again, thank you very much. And Slava Ukraini. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gennady. We appreciate your presence here and praying for your family members more specifically now. Thank you so much. Dr. Raphael Danziger, please.
Thank you, Will. Thank you all for attending this event. And I want to start by totally identifying with the suffering of the Ukrainian people, the heroic Ukrainian people under the leadership, the amazing leadership of President Zelensky, and also to totally identify with what President Biden said today when he called Putin a war criminal. It's very, very important that he said that, and he is a war criminal. And I think that the term fascist is not really far from reality of what's going on in Ukraine. And I really feel such deep empathy for the Ukrainian people. And like Gennady, I'm Jewish too. And so, as you know, the Jews suffered a lot too. So I really, really identify with the terrible suffering of the Ukrainian people. Now, before I go to what I want to say, I will start with two disclaimers. The first one is that I was trained as a historian, so I'm pretty good in predicting the past, not quite as good as predicting the future. So don't take my predictions too seriously. I would even say that if I'd given a talk yesterday, my prediction would have been different from what it will be today, and it probably will be different again tomorrow if I give another talk. But I'm in good company because the New York Times today predicted something wrong too. in today's New York Times. Today's New York Times paper edition, of course, reflects yesterday's news, not today's. And they said that now there's no chance whatsoever for negotiations, for anything to happen, because there was a negative statement by the Russians. Today, it's the opposite. So what I'm saying is the situation is very fluid and things can change. And we really don't know what's going to happen, but I will take my chance with some possible predictions. That's my first disclaimer, that I'm not, that I am good in predicting the past, not the future. Second disclaimer is that my expertise over the decades has not been Eastern Europe. I don't know any of the East European languages. It has been the Middle East. But, you know, to deal with the Middle East, of course, I had to deal with the international situation in general, because the Middle East affects the world and the world affects the Middle East. So I hope that what I'll say about the international situation, the international repercussions of what's happening in Ukraine will have some kind of interest to, at least to some of you. Okay, so I'll start by talking about what I think Putin wanted to achieve in Ukraine. I think now we know better than we did before. And it seems that the reality is that he really wanted no less than occupy all of Ukraine and bring it back to to Mother Russia, as it was for centuries before. And Ukraine only had 5 years of independence from 1917 to 1922, and now since 1991. And so he didn't think it was real. He thought that really, as it was under the Tsarist Russia and under the Soviet Union, it's very simple. Ukraine is part of Mother Russia, and it should go back. And that's why that's what he really wanted to achieve. That's what I believe. Now, what made him think that he could succeed in achieving that objective? It's not so simple to occupy a big country. You probably all know that Ukraine is the biggest country in all of Europe. That's all. Russia is not just Europe, most of it is Asia, but in Europe, it's the biggest country. It was 44 million before the tragic flight of the more than 3 million refugees, as we heard. It's a big country. It's not such a simple thing to occupy such a big country. So why did he think he could succeed? I think that there are several reasons. And the main one is that I think he was totally misled by the Russian intelligence. And presumably it seems that the chiefs of the Russian intelligence basically told him what they thought he wanted to hear rather than what they really believed. I don't know that, of course, but it seems that he really believed that the Ukrainian people basically love Russia so much that they would actually throw flowers on the tanks that come into Ukraine. And actually, as Tom Friedman wrote in today's New York Times, he thought that after 3 weeks, which are today, 3 weeks since February 24th, when the invasion began, the Russian soldiers would have trouble removing all the flowers from the tanks that the Ukrainians would have thrown on. And that was his assumption, that Ukrainians will welcome the Russians with open arms. Number two, he thought that the Ukrainian army is very weak. And indeed, the numbers are almost pathetic when you look at the numbers about the Ukrainian Air Force. It has fewer than 100 combat planes, and they're all old planes from the Soviet Union, for the Soviet period. And Russia, of course, is a much, much bigger Air Force, much, much bigger army. And he thought that the Ukrainian army, if even it put some resistance, it would not be serious, and Russia will overwhelm it in just a few days. And he also thought and now I'm quoting Tom Friedman again. He said that according to Tom Friedman, Putin probably thought that within 3 weeks, which is today, not only will there be flowers on the Russian tanks, but Zelensky is going to be comfortable in a Airbnb in Poland. And he thought that he will be giving a speech in the Ukrainian parliament in Kiev. And he thought that he and President Xi of China are going to high-five each other about this tremendous achievement against NATO in the West. And obviously, none of that really happened. So what really happened? I think what we all know is that the Ukrainian people did not exactly receive the Russians with open arms. It's as far from the truth as can be, as we all know now. Number two, Putin also thought that, and that is something that is explained well in an article that also today's New York Times by Brett Stevens, who's also an excellent columnist of the New York Times. He said that when Putin looked at the record of how the West reacted to previous aggression by the Soviet Union, by himself, he thought that the West and NATO is not going to do anything, that he can do all of that without paying any real price. He looked at how the West reacted to the invasion of Georgia, Crimea, and many other crimes that were committed, the attempted and sometimes successful attempts to kill dissidents in the West, in Britain. And so he thought there's not going to be any kind of real resistance on the part of NATO and the West. So there was another reason why he thought he could get away with this incredible thing. And he saw he also saw the United States. In his imagination, President Biden is a weak president. He's not going to do anything. And so the result is going to be that there's going to be a huge victory of Russia over NATO, and the whole world order might change in his direction. It's no longer going to be a rules order based on American leadership and on the West, but it's going to be a different kind of situation where Russia will again be a superpower, a true superpower, and it will be able to get things its way in the world order. Now, of course, none of that happened. So as I said, number one, because the Ukrainians were not at all what the Russians thought. The Ukrainians did not want the Russians. They resisted in a way that just, I think, created tremendous admiration all over the world, including certainly the United States. And he saw that the Western reaction was much, much more serious than he expected. The kind of sanctions, more than 5,000 sanctions have been imposed on Russia, which really are very serious biting sanctions. He did not expect any of that because the sanctions that were imposed before over his previous acts of aggression were basically a slap on the wrist, but these are real biting sanctions. And certainly did not expect that the West will provide very serious amounts of weaponry to Ukraine. And just today, as you heard, President Biden promised another $800 million of weaponry to Ukraine, on top of $200 million that were already pledged before, and part of which have already been supplied. And he also promised to provide a kind of weaponry that has not been provided so far, which can be very, very important for Ukraine in its resistance against the Russians. And those are, number one, long-range anti-aircraft missiles. Right now, Ukraine basically has Stinger, which are handheld, which are very short range, but this could be very, very serious. The improvement on what the Ukrainians can do. And number two, while Ukraine will not get the support for of American planes flying over Ukraine to prevent the Russians from bombing, that's not going to happen because the Americans are afraid that this could lead to World War III. But in addition to those weapons, it will, the weapons that we already know about, there now is another weapon that was promised by Biden, and that could be a game changer. And those are very sophisticated drones. We already saw that drones that were supplied by the Turks to Ukraine have been very effective, actually, in killing Russian tanks. And that was really very, very important. And the American drones that will be supplied are much more sophisticated than the Turkish drones. So that really, I think, will cause a lot of pain to the Russians, will cause many more casualties, a lot more damage to their hardware. So I think none of that was expected by Putin, who really thought that the West is weak. And I would say that perhaps the most important effect that Putin did not expect at all was that he thought that this operation, which he calls what was his name, some kind of a name that sounds very innocent, but of course it's an invasion, it's a very serious war. He thought that this is going to split, the Europeans would split NATO. Why? Because he thought that countries that are heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas will say, let's not do anything because we can't afford to anger the Russians. And other countries will say, let's get tough. And so he thought it's going to split NATO. And yet what happened, as you all know, was the exact opposite. NATO has not been so united, perhaps since the first Gulf War, or perhaps the beginning, right after 9/11. And actually, some people say that February 24th for Europe is what 9/11 was for the Americans, and perhaps even more serious, because the Europeans lived in what they thought was a paradise. They thought that Europe is quiet, Europe is safe, no need to worry, there's no military threat to Europe ever since the Soviet Union collapsed. And therefore, they can just live a nice, quiet life. They slashed the defense budgets because they didn't perceive any threat to themselves or to anybody in Europe. And so they thought we're going to live happily after that way. But this changed everything. The invasion changed everything. Now the Europeans see that it's a real threat to the lifestyle, to the independence, to the freedom. And so then suddenly Germany, which was almost pacifistic until February 24th, suddenly has actually doubled its defense budget. It's amazing. Nobody expected that to happen. And so that was a very, very important development. And again, NATO now is more united and under American leadership, which has been lacking for a while. As you know, previously some Americans thought that we can do without NATO, it's not important. Now everybody sees how important NATO is, and Biden is again seen as a leader of NATO. He sent thousands of troops to European countries. And so all of that was very, very unpleasant surprise to Putin, who did not expect any of that. He thought it's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to make him again a superpower, and it did not happen. Now, does this mean that Putin has lost the war? I'm not so sure about that. I think that even though he has suffered very severe setbacks in the last 3 weeks, and things did not, as I said, did not at all work the way he thought they're going to work, at the same time, the Russian army still occupies substantial chunks of Ukraine. It's making progress, especially in the southern part of the country. It's already captured Kherson. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, probably not, but it's a port city on the Black Sea, and is moving, and the Russian army is moving toward Odessa, which is, of course, the main port city of Ukraine, and as in trying to choke off Ukraine by blocking off its Black Sea access. And I'm not sure that's not going to happen. The Russians may succeed in doing that. And they're also slowly strangulating Ukrainian cities. They've not quite succeeded in totally surrounding Kiev, but they're getting there, and they're still moving. Again, taking bad casualties, but they're still moving. So I would not say that the war in Ukraine is over. I think it's premature to say that. I'm not saying, I can't say now that Russia has lost the war. Now, what does Ukraine want? I think what Ukraine wants is pretty basic things. First of all, Ukraine wants to maintain its territorial integrity. It wants to be in control of its whole entire territory. It wants to maintain its freedom, and it wants to maintain its democracy. Now, we know that democracy in Ukraine has not been perfect, but which has been perfect? Which democracy has been perfect? But it's a democracy. Certainly, if you compare it to Russia or to other non-democratic countries, and Ukraine wants to maintain the democracy, that freedom, all in its entire territory. Number two, Ukraine, which already has suffered before this invasion by the loss of Crimea and by what's happening in the eastern part of Ukraine, wants to get closer and closer to the West. It would really love to join NATO, and it would love to join the European Union. NATO for security reasons, and the European Union for economic, mostly economic reasons. Really, Ukraine wants to be part of the West, not of the East, does not want to be part of the Russians in any way. So I think these are the things that Ukraine wants to achieve more than anything. Now, will they achieve those goals? I think some of them partially, others not. I think that that the chance that Ukraine will regain full command over its entire territory, I think, are very remote. I don't see Russia giving up Crimea. I think it's going to stay under Russian control. It's possible that Russia will not get the international legitimacy for this control which it craves, but I don't see that that Russia will remove the troops from Crimea. I don't think it's seen right now as a realistic option. I also don't think there's much of a chance that the Russians will give up the parts of Eastern Ukraine, which are mostly populated by Russians, where there's this insurgency, where Russian troops have been there for a while, sometimes in disguise, sometimes not. And so I'm not sure that the Ukraine will regain its whole territory. It probably will regain part of it, maybe most of it. I don't think we'll regain all of it. Joining NATO, I think, is becoming less and less viable. And actually, I think Zelensky even said as much. That's right now, that's not on the table. I'm not sure of the exact wording, but something to that effect. The European Union, let me tell you a story about admission to the European Union. The story is that some years ago, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria all were candidates to join the European Union. And the European Union representatives met with the Romanians, Bulgarians, and Turks and told them, look, we will only admit countries that know European history. So we'll ask each one of you one question. If you answer it correctly, you are in. If you answer incorrectly, you're out. Okay. So they asked the Bulgarian, when did World War I begin? Bulgarian said 1914. Terrific, you're in. Asked the Romanian, when did World War I end? 1918. Fantastic, you're in. Asked the Turk, how many people were killed in World War I and what were their names? In other words, if the European Union wants somebody in, then it will make it relatively easy. If they don't want somebody in, they will make it exceedingly difficult. They did not want the Turks, they still don't want them. But I think that the Ukraine, if there's eventually an agreement that will allow them to join the European Union, it will take some time because there are 35 different clauses that each candidate has to meet in order to join the European Union. And Ukraine right now is pretty far from meeting some of them. But I think that's possible. They may eventually, not in a year or two, but later, maybe they will eventually join the European Union. Now, what are the possible, I see I have only a couple minutes left. What are the possible outcomes? One outcome is simply that Russia will occupy all of Ukraine and will annex it, and that will become a fact. I'm not sure at all that this is what's going to happen, simply because the Russians have learned that the Ukrainians are going to resist every inch of the way. And they already learned a very hard lesson in Afghanistan. What happens if you annex, or not annex in that case, occupy the whole country, and the whole country is against you, then eventually you leave with your tail between your legs. So I don't know, of course, and as I said, I'm not good about predicting the future, but I think that they will not do that. Another possibility is that they will take Kiev eventually, which is possible, and then they will put a puppet to run the country, which will be Ukrainian, who will be a Ukrainian, but will basically do everything that Putin will tell him to do. That probably is something Putin would very much like to happen if he cannot get annexation full annexation of Ukraine. But I think that also will generate tremendous resistance. I think the Ukrainian people, once they've tasted real freedom and they saw who the Russians are and what they do, I think that's not a viable solution either. I think, and the reason I said in the beginning that today I'll present my opinion about possible future outcomes differently from yesterday. Yesterday, it seems that the war will go on and on and on until Russia captures all of Ukraine. Today, there are more and more signs that the Russians are seeing that's not going to happen. And so there's more talk on both sides, both the Russia and Ukraine, that negotiations for some kind of a deal are now moving forward. So that is now, yesterday I wouldn't have said that. Today I'm saying that this seems right now as very much a possible outcome. of what's going on there. Now, what kind of a agreement could be reached? I think that for the Russians, the most important thing is to make sure that Ukraine does not join NATO. And I think, as I said already, Zelensky is more or less, perhaps has made his peace with it. I'm not sure, but so it seems. But there's talk, the Russians have talked about making Ukraine a neutral country, just like Finland or Austria to some extent. And so they will settle for that. There's one problem. And the problem is that back in 1990 and 1994, Ukraine gave up all of its 1,900 nuclear warheads in return for a Soviet commitment, sorry, by that time Russian, a Russian commitment to always respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And of course, we see to the extent to which Putin has respected that clause in the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. So, of course, just the notion that Ukraine would simply agree to such neutrality and respect and expect the Russians to respect that and its territorial integrity, I think, is not there. So basically, again, according to leaks from the negotiations, I don't know how true they are, what Zelensky is asking for is real guarantees from Western powers that if Russia or anybody attacks Ukraine, then they will all come to Ukraine's defense. That's basically the same as Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which says that an attack on one country of NATO is like an attack on all, and all of them are then required to get in. So that is quite an ask from the Western countries. I don't know if Zelensky will actually get that from the West, but I think that seems to be right now the biggest issue between a deal and not a no deal. In the meantime, the Russians are continuing to pound Ukraine. And I think they believe that this is going to increase the leverage over Ukraine because Ukraine will just be tired of the war, will want to make a deal, and therefore they will make more concessions. Okay, I already see that and I apologize for that because Gennady was very good in keeping to his 20 minutes. I went a little bit beyond that, so I apologize for this. So let me end here by again expressing my deep sympathy and empathy for the Ukrainian people and my tremendous admiration for President Zelensky, and be very happy to answer questions. But I hope the questions to me will not be too detailed about the history of Ukraine or Russia, of which I'm not an expert, but more about the international repercussions of the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Why don't we all just take a big, deep breath, because we've heard a lot of pain and anger and angst. Let the air go out with a little noise. One more big, deep breath. Let it out with a little noise. I'm going to get a musical piece set up here for us to be able to see. Another musical piece from Kitka.
Lule, lule, mi synoczku, tato zrobić zabawoczku, zrobić szabelku klenową, ta się konienka gnedą. Mama wyszyje soroczku. Lule, lule, mi synoczku. Та й поїдеш світ широкий. освітлані, вийшла з хати стара мати, стала коня напувати, як напоїть та й заплаче. Люлі, люлі, мій козаче, котки два, шарі бурі обидва, котки два, шарі бурі обидва, котки два, шарі бурі
Let me, here we go. Gennady, thank you for your sharing your heart. And we know that you work with refugees even today.
Yes, I'm working
And-
with a Jewish family and community service with Holocaust survivors.
Mm. Well, sadly, the UN estimates we'll see up to 2 billion ecological refugees even by the year 2100. And I'm afraid that the conflicts like this one and others will increase that number.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the plight of refugees these days coming out of Ukraine?
Again, what did you ask, Will?
What can you tell us about the plight of Ukrainian refugees today?
Okay, what they're doing. So first of all, they have to figure it out where and how we will live, how to feed their kids. And a lot of refugees, it was before war, I have to tell you, it was very big chunk of of Ukrainian population, like almost 150,000 men went to Western Europe and Poland to work there to earn some money. 100,000 men returned to Ukraine to fight with Russians. So, and their family right now in Poland, again, they just like fled Ukraine. They're in the middle of this war. They are nowhere. They want to start their life or somehow to keep their kids like alive. And we will see what happened. I have to tell you, Ukrainians, it's a national character. They know how to work hard, and they're ready to work hard to establish their new life. But when Ukraine will win, and Ukraine will, I believe 100%, we will return to Ukraine to rebuild their native country. This is my prediction.
Thank you. Rafi, what are you hearing about the plight? We see them, the numbers and the arrows going off of the news to different countries, but I'm hearing that folks are even going to their loved ones even further away than the countries right next to Ukraine. Do you know anything about the refugee situation, Rafi?
Yeah, of course, this is a really heart-rending situation. We have all watched on nightly news and seen those poor refugees who barely make it out, and the hearts are still in Ukraine. And since, understandably, men up to age 60 are not allowed to leave, then it's mostly women and children who are the most vulnerable. And they, of course, very worry all the time about their loved husbands and fathers, what's going to happen to them. They have no way of knowing. So the suffering is tremendous, and they've spread all over Europe. I think Poland has done a fantastic job, especially of receiving so many of them. I believe more than half, if I'm not mistaken, are now in Poland, and they're received warmly with open hearts. And they've spread to other countries too. The United States and also Israel has received several thousand. So yes, they're everywhere, and they're suffering everywhere. And despite all the efforts to take them in, which are very admirable, the suffering will continue because nobody wants to leave their home. Nobody wants to leave behind the loved ones, in this case, the men who have to stay behind and fight.
So we know that the civilians that have tried to leave have been able to go, and I guess up to 2.8 or 3 million refugees are on their way out. There are some foreign 3 million?
3.1.
Yeah.
3.1 now. Thank you for that update. We're also hearing of some fighters coming in from outside to stand with Ukraine, including some military from our own country here that are even being there as trainers. What do we hear about how efficacious or how helpful are they to the Ukrainian military? Any idea, either of you, if any of you heard any about that?
Well,
Raphael, you want to start or?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Gennady. Go
You know, again, in my humble opinion, I'm not a military analyst, but what I want to tell you, it's a lot, not a lot of them in numbers. Important thing, they are professionals, but even more important, it's a sign of love to Ukraine from the different country, which is even more important sometimes than people with weapon themselves.
I would add that the training, I think, is very, very important because you have real top professionals from the United States, which has, of course, excellent professionals in the field. And actually, I happen to know about Israel, and there are in Israel many Jews who came from the Ukraine, and now quite a few, and the Israeli army is a top-notch army too. And so some of those people who were served in elite combat units in the Israeli army are now in Ukraine and are training Ukrainian soldiers and actually fighting with them. So I think that, first of all, as you say, Gennady, that shows the love that exists for Ukraine. And also, I think it is really, really helpful to have such top people in the field who know professionally what to do, who help the Ukrainians, and especially since there's so many civilians who want to fight and who are fighting but don't have any real training. So to have those trainers coming from abroad while the Ukrainian soldiers themselves can fight, they don't need to train the civilians. I think this is, and I saw some pictures of or videos of foreign experts training civilians how to fight, and that, of course, is critical.
If I can add, American officers and soldiers and surgeons started to train Ukrainian army after Russia took Crimea. So it continued many years. That's why today, Ukrainian army, it's a European army. It's an organized, professional, and great. And of course, these people from a different country, it's very important. It's absolutely, maybe not crucial, but it's very important because Ukrainians believe that they're holding the fort right now, as of today, for whole Western civilization.
Is there a peace movement within Ukraine? Are there pacifists that are trying to do any work? Have they been successful in any ways? Is there a peace movement inside Ukraine of any size?
You know, like peace movement, it's a great thing. but not during wartime when you have to fight for your life, for your country, for your family. And as of today, because I know like maybe a little more like fresh information, Raphael, thank you so much for your very deep analysis. But I want to add a couple words because I know the situation hour by hour.
Mhm.
So as of today, President Zelensky said, we will not give up Crimea, we will not give up Donbass territory. It's Donetsk and Lugansk, this territory. We will not give up in one small piece of Ukrainian territory.
Well, I hope very much that he will succeed in that. I'm afraid it's very difficult to see this happening, but
Yeah.
I deeply, fervently hope that this will actually happen.
Yeah, but we're all hope, just like, again, I'm so thankful for your very deep analysis,
Thank you.
but it's only what lack in your analysis. I have it. I lived in Ukraine. I
Okay.
know Ukrainian character. Will we fight for their country till the last people, till the last person? We will, and we will win.
I wish
We
you
will
luck.
win for
I wish you
sure.
luck. I wish you luck, of course. I would
Thank
also
you.
add. I would also add to what you said about the pacifist movement. I think you're absolutely right. When a country is attacked, there's no room for pacifist movement. There's room
But
for
sometimes the peace movement in the country being attacked can find the extra support in the country that's doing the attacking, and they can sometimes be helpful. But it's if that country has a conscience, right? And we sadly, Vladimir Putin has proved to us he has no conscience in multiple wars like this, especially Georgia and Chechnya, let alone the quick taking of Crimea and just the bloody destruction of those countries in those regions before Russia finished their fighting there.
Yeah, I would add to that. Sorry.
Yeah, please, Raphael, sorry.
No, I would add to
Give me
that.
10 seconds, yeah.
I would add to that if you that sometimes pacifism, or rather like non-violent or peaceful resistance, can work. We all know, of course, about Gandhi and the success of the peaceful non-violent resistance to the British, but that was the British. Gandhi thought that the same thing could work also against the Nazis, but I think we know now that we're totally hopeless. Just as you said, if the leaders and the people who run the country don't have any conscience, then it's not going to work. And I think the same thing as Gennady said, as you said, it's not going to work against a country led by Putin who has no conscience.
So there's been some articles written about the conflict between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the Ukraine they were one and the same a few years ago, but there's portions of the Orthodox tradition inside Ukraine that have separated themselves as a new Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And there was a statement yesterday by Kirill, the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, that has elicited a response from Christian ministers and leaders of denominations here in the United States. And they wrote this letter. They said, His Holiness Kirill, Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Russia Orthodox Church, Your Holiness, we write you as brothers and sisters in Christ. Some of us have worked with you in fellowship in ecumenical settings. All of us serve in various positions of leadership and service in churches and Christian organizations. We know well the heavy responsibility and challenges which rest on you and all those called by God to be shepherds and servants of God's people. With broken hearts, we are making an earnest plea that you use your voice and profound influence to call for an end to the hostilities and war in Ukraine and intervene with authorities in your nation to do so. We are all witnessing the tragic and terrible loss of innocent civilian life and the grave dangers of escalation posing the deepest threats to peace in the world. Moreover, we grieve for the ways the body of Christ is being torn asunder by warring factions. The peace desired by our common Lord demands that this immoral warfare end, halting the bombing, shelling, and killing, and withdrawing armed forces to their previous boundaries. We make this appeal with no political agenda. Before God, we bear witness that there is no religious justification from any side for the destruction and terror the world is witnessing daily. Our first allegiance is always to our Lord Jesus Christ. This transcends the narrow claims of all nations and ideologies. We are in the season of Lent. In that Lenten spirit, we ask you to prayerfully reconsider your support, the support you have given to this war because of the horrendous human suffering it has unleashed. In this moment, as the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, you have the holy opportunity to play an historic role in helping to bring a cessation of senseless violence and a restoration of peace. We pray you will do so, and our prayers will accompany you. Respectfully yours, and in the Lord Jesus Christ. And then there's 40 or 50 names of denominational leaders of every major denomination and religious parachurch ministry. So this is one way that Christians are talking about this as an internal Christian conversation, but we know that there's this division between Kirill, who wants these breakaway Ukrainian Orthodox churches back, but also is siding with Putin in this. And it's really sad to see as a Christian myself. Yeah, Gennady.
Okay, I'm so sorry, Will. All of you, ladies and gentlemen, you're so nice and kind people, but you never lived in former Soviet Union, and you have very slight idea what does it mean today's Russia. About Kirill, he's blessed, he gives his blessing for Putin to start with war. He's not God's servant, he serves Putin. And all these letters to him, it's nothing. It's an empty words for him because he's a servant of Putin. In my native city, like to tell you the truth, 5 days ago, they bombed biggest church, Russian Orthodox church in our city. This church was built in 1672. They bombed, even though a lot of Christians, and not just like Christians, not religious people trying to find like some shelter for themselves in this church. Couple days ago, they bombed synagogue in my native city. They bombed synagogue. 1 day ago, they bombed mosque in my native city. It's only Kharkov. It's one of the biggest cities in the Ukraine, but anyway, he's not a God's servant. He's a Putin servant. And he's the same fascist as a Putin. Believe me, I know it by my heart. Unfortunately, he's not a God's servant.
Well, we're seeing that in the way he's responding in this way. Have you heard anything about this, Rafi?
No, I know nothing about this, and I'm enlightened by what Gennady just explained. It makes a lot of sense to me, because as far as I know, Putin has done everything possible to get every sector of the Russian population under his control. And it's not a surprise to me at all that the Russian Orthodox Church, which is so important in Russia, is under his control as well. And of course, it starts from the top. So of course, he will, first of all, get his control over the head of the church. So,
well, it's really sad to watch the Christians there give into this. It's also sad to see the rise of so many Christians here in this country, in the United States, that have become pro-Putin over the last few years and have been elevating their own form of religious right and Christian nationalism here that's mirroring in many ways what's going on in Russia. Gene Kaufman, one of our attendees, asked, when the war ends, what will happen with the sanctions?
Okay, I'll try to answer that. I think that it very much depends on how the war ends. If the war ends in the worst possible case, which as I said, I don't think it's going to end like that, with Russia totally controlling all of Ukraine and keeping it under an iron fist, I think that in that case, the sanction will continue as long as this occupation continues. If there's a deal that both sides agree to, in which Ukraine becomes neutral in some fashion, and Ukraine agrees to that, then I think that gradually sanctions are going to be lifted. But at the same time, the fear that Putin has now engendered in Western Europe is not going to go away. I think it will continue to make every effort to reduce the dependence on Russian oil and gas. We'll continue to build up the defense forces. We'll continue to look to the United States as the one superpower that can defend them if necessary. So I think some of those effects are going to continue for the duration, way beyond the war. But I think the sanctions, as I said, they probably will be gradually removed or lifted if indeed there's a deal between the two sides.
Raphael, do you see any chance of reparations here?
I don't see a chance that Russia will pay any reparations. They could be demands, just like the United Nations, it's called the International Criminal Court, started proceedings against Putin as a war criminal, but I don't think it's going to lead anywhere. I think that Putin is not a pariah. He is not going to travel to any Western country anytime soon. But at the same time, I don't see that anybody will be able to force him to pay reparations. And so it will be, the demand probably will be made, and it will be very totally justified demand after the terrible damage and loss of life that he has caused. But I just don't see how Putin is going to pay it. I don't hear anything now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to move us to a broader conversation with the people that are in attendance today. We do have 63 people with us still. Heather, the question you asked, I don't think we have a person to answer that about the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. I think it's under the Pope. If it's a Catholic, even a Greek Catholic, it might have some dual loyalties. I think there's a Melkite tradition in the Holy Land that's similar to that, but I didn't know that there was a Ukrainian one. So what other questions might we have today that others in our conversation would like to ask directly? You can unmute yourself now. Francis? You're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, I don't.
Al Zemsky?
No, I have no question.
Okay, Donald Mintz, did you have a question?
Yeah, who pays?
Oh, we heard one word and then you went away, Al. Or Donald.
How do you rebuild Ukraine after all the tragedy? Who pays for the rebuilding of the homes and everything like that? That's a worldwide problem.
You mean, how do you rebuild? Is that the question? How do you rebuild Ukraine?
Yes.
And who would pay?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of money available. I believe that already $13 billion have been committed to that. And I think the world will do a lot to provide them the resources will enable the rebuilding of Ukraine. I think it's kind of a world responsibility, especially the richer Western countries, United States and West European countries, to do what they can to rebuild Ukraine. And they have an interest in seeing Ukraine again being rebuilt.
Thank you. And for other folks that are asking questions, I'm going to ask you to use the reactions button at the bottom and to raise your hand, since that makes it easy, like I just did. So since it makes it easier for me to see you when you have your hand raised. Gennady, did you want to answer that question?
I will answer. So before I will answer, like very short history. Russian Federation fought 2 wars with Chechnya. The population of Chechnya, it's 1 million people, and the territory of Chechnya, it's less than Kiev region. In Afghanistan, Soviet Union fought more than 10 years, lost 15,000 lives. In Chechnya, they lost 12,000 lives and 2 wars, almost 10 years. They want to what do you think? Like Ukraine, it's a like more than a territory. It's more than France. 42 million people who wants to fight till end for their country. And about rebuilding, if you remember, like end of World War II, it was the whole Europe in ruins and rubbles, and it was Marshall Plan for European countries. Only Stalin denied this plan for Soviet Union, but they rebuilt Western Europe. And to tell you the truth, like a couple of days ago, my daughter, she's a social worker here in the United States, she told me, when Ukraine will win, maybe I'll go to help to rebuild Ukraine. Ukrainian
That would be
people
beautiful.
with help of international community, United States and all European countries will rebuild their country. I believe in that. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I know.
Thank you. Rafi, I have a question for you. I remember a few weeks ago, someone reminding me that Ukraine, after the fall of and the dissolving of the Soviet Union, had nuclear weapons. And they gave them to the West, to the UK, with the promise that the UK and the West would protect them. Is that right? Do I remember that wrong? Did I hear it wrong?
That's not quite accurate. I mentioned before the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, under which Ukraine gave up all its 1,900 nuclear warheads. It did not give them to Britain, it gave them to Russia. And Russia was supposed to destroy them. I don't know if it did or not, that's really beside the point. But this was, as I also mentioned, in return for a commitment by Russia to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That's why they did it. And of course, we know how much the Russians respect it. And that's why today the Ukrainians have zero trust in any kind of pledges by the Russians. And I want to see Western guarantees, NATO-like guarantees, as I also mentioned before, to make sure that if, again, Russia attacks Ukraine, that the Western countries will come to its aid, which is a big ask. As I said, it's basically almost like Ukraine joining NATO. I'm not sure if it will be possible to achieve that, but I think that's what they want if they agree to neutrality, if they get to keep most of the territory.
If I may add something, may I?
Of course.
Please.
Thank you. So, like, if you're interested in history, you can read who signed Budapest Memorandum. It was not only Great Britain. It was Russia, it was Great Britain, France, and the United States of America.
Right.
When in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and took Crimea, who helped Ukraine? May I ask? Nobody. Nobody. Means all these memorandums, all this piece of paper worth nothing. It's nothing. Nobody helped. That's why President Zelensky said, we're by ourselves. So if Russia will change like something, like Putin will be like killed, or I don't know what will happen, maybe Russia will become a trustworthy country. I don't know. As of today, for all of you, it's very interesting information, very sad information, but interesting. 72% of Russian population brainwashed, and they completely agree to destroy Ukraine. What can you do with such a population? 140 million of Russian population, 72% wants to continue war.
Well, we don't know, by the way, we don't know to what extent public opinion polls in Russia really are reliable, because I'm sure that Putin has something to say about public opinion polls, and this is what he wants, perhaps, the public opinion polls.
You can never trust polls in authoritarian regimes. We have one last question for us today, and it's from Reverend Channing Miller of the Rossmoor Interfaith Council, who says, Zelensky said today this could be the start of World War III with the Russian invasion. What do you think will happen towards World War III?
Well, in my opinion, this is not likely because what could start it, not certainly, but it's not certain, but could start is if indeed the United States or Western countries get involved militarily inside Ukraine, fighting Russian forces, whether by no-fly zone, in other words, American planes, for instance, fly over Ukraine and shoot down Russian planes that try to attack Ukraine. But that's already clear it's not going to happen. And Biden has made very clear that he has no intention of sending American troops as American troops. I'm not talking about this or that advisor who comes in, volunteer, but as American troops on behalf of the American government, it's not going to happen. So I think that the Americans are very cautious. The Europeans are very cautious. They don't want to get involved in any kind of fighting against the Russians. As I said, they're willing to provide a lot of aid, financial and military aid, but not to get involved themselves. And I think the way to get to World War III is direct fighting between Western forces and Russian forces. I don't see that happening. Again, you have to take everything I say about the future with a huge grain of salt because...
and things may change tomorrow.
Exactly.
Gennady?
You know what? On one hand, I am completely agree with Raphael. Nobody wants to start World War III. But I don't think so it will start it because you have to understand psychological what happened in his mind. He's from Leningrad's, he's a hooligan. And all hooligans in his childhood, I mean Putin's childhood, they want to, okay, I'll kill you, put the knife, I'll kill you. But when some started, to defend himself or herself, they immediately disappear. It's in his mind, but I think he's not like a normal person right now. Nobody knows what happened inside his head. He can do anything and everything, but he really wants to live. When pandemic started, COVID-19, he went from Moscow to Ural and sitting in a bunker 2 years in a row means he wants to live. So that's why he understands, even though he's a crazy guy, he understands if he will start World War III, he will die for sure. Him, his daughters, his 4 sons, 2 sons and 2 daughters from Alina Kabaeva, he doesn't want to die. So that's why I think it will be no World War III.
Thank you. We're going to share a resource page that we've put together as the Interfaith Council that has some prayers. It has some links to different international agencies that are helping to work with and help serve the refugees. It has some musical prayers for peace from different places, including some of the Kitka music. And then we put in some background context on the conflict with some articles that are there as well. And we want to thank you for joining us for this this program on perspectives on the conflict in Ukraine. And again, any day things can change. Even tomorrow can change, and our hope and our continued prayers for President Zelensky and for a peaceful resolution continue, even as we hear this song by the Kitka Women's Vocal Ensemble.
Ой, давно-давно матінки була, що чекає до кришка, терноми заросла. Ой, не так терном, як шипшиною, не походили, із матінкою. А я скочу, скочу, припил вином льох.
Ой, лечу, лечу поміж галочок.
Прилетіла сіла в матінки в садок.
На тій орішені, що на край саду.
Вийшла, вийшла мати, рано води брать. Не набрала води, набрала слізок. Невісточки, дочки, пора уставать. Що нашим садом за пташкою? Ой, то ж не пташка, то ж ваша дочка. Родилась без щастя зросла, без долі вродилась, без щастя зросла. На